Okay, so for decades, Canada has really built this narrative, haven't they? That immigration is, well, both core policy and part of the national identity, a welcoming place.
Absolutely. That consensus, that broad agreement, it felt like bedrock for generations.
Mm.
But if you dive into the sources we're looking at today, covering just the last few years, you see this really dramatic collision.
A collision.
Yeah, that deeply held identity just slammed up against, well, basic economic and infrastructure limits. It happened fast.
Okay, let's definitely unpack this. Our mission today is this deep dive into how Canada went from that sort of open door idea to setting what some sources are calling hard limits.
And specifically on temporary residence, right? That stream just ballooned until very, very recently.
Exactly. So we're pulling together these reports to really map out the political, the economic, the demographic forces that kind of curdled that consensus.
Right. The main story here is that Canada's strategy for growth, relying so heavily on these rapid temporary inflows, it just, well, it hit a wall.
A reality check.
Precisely. Primarily housing shortages, but also strained public services. It became undeniable.
So let's set that stage. The acceleration part, we need to rewind a bit to just after the pandemic, right? Immigration had bottomed out then.
Lowest levels in over 20 years during the lockdowns, yeah. Then, starting around 2021, maybe 2022, Ottawa just floored it.
Hit the accelerator.
Completely, especially on temporary streams. We saw this explosion in international students and much wider use of open work permits.
And what was the thinking there? Why the sudden rush?
Well, at the time, it felt like an urgent need. The rationale was pretty straightforward. Canada had this, rapidly graying workforce
Okay.
and stubborn labor shortages in key areas, think healthcare, skilled trades.
Right.
So these newcomers, especially temporary workers and students who often fill service jobs, they were seen as the quick fix, the way to keep the economy moving, fill those gaps.
It sounds like a practical, almost technical solution to an economic problem.
It was framed that way. But the thing about temporary immigration, which maybe wasn't fully grasped, is that it often seems like it puts less strain on long-term planning.
Because they aren't supposed to stay forever, theoretically.
Exactly. Theoretically, that made it politically appealing. But that sustained, super fast inflow, it just massively outpaced building new homes, schools, transit.
Right.
It overwhelmed the system. And when communities get unaffordable, when you can't get a doctor's appointment, well, the politics of welcome can evaporate pretty fast.
And that's the tipping point we saw. The pressure became huge.
Immense, leading to this radical policy reversal, what the sources are calling the big break.
A big break. I like that term.
Yeah, it captures the suddenness.
Yeah.
In October 2024, Mark Miller, the immigration minister at the time, announced a total U-turn.
A complete change.
With a very specific, very ambitious goal: cap and tighten those temporary streams, aiming to precipitously, that was the word used, reduce their share of the population.
Wow, precipitously. Down to what level?
Down to 5% of the total population by 2027. A huge shift.
From full throttle to a sudden stop in just months. So what was the immediate effect? Did the numbers actually slow down right away?
Oh, it was immediate. And the numbers are, frankly, startling. Let's look at the key statistic from the reports.
No.
Statistics Canada just reported that Canada added only about 47,000 people in the second quarter of this year.
47,000. Okay, that sounds... Well, is that a lot or little in this context?
Context is everything here. One source had a great analogy. It's just enough people to sell out a Blue Jays game.
Ah, okay. That puts it in perspective.
It really does. It marks the slowest second quarter growth, if you exclude the weirdness of the pandemic years, in over half a century.
Wow, over 50 years.
Yeah. Considering how much we've relied on immigration for growth recently, that's a massive demographic slowdown. It shows a big break definitely worked, policy-wise.
But it also shows how sensitive growth has become to these policy levers, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Very sensitive.
That is a staggering figure. Especially thinking back just 3 years ago, the message was all about growth, growth, growth. So what's driving this slowdown? Is it across the board or one particular stream?
The reports are pretty clear. It's mainly fewer temporary residents overall, but the biggest driver seems to be a significant drop in study permit holders.
International students.
Exactly. Which makes sense from a policy perspective, right? Capping student intake is one of the more direct administrative levers the government can pull to quickly ease population pressure.
Okay, so the numbers are slowing down. But now we get into the weeds, the complexity of actually counting people, which brings us to this issue of murky numbers.
Right, and this is fascinating. Economists keep warning that our traditional ways of counting might not be giving us the full picture.
How so?
Well, the official headcounts might be overstating how many people leave, while at the same time understating the number of people who are actually here but stuck in what they call paperwork limbo.
Paperwork limbo, that sounds frustrating. Who are we talking about there?
People physically in Canada, but their status is uncertain or pending. So permanent residency applicants waiting ages for processing.
Okay.
Asylum seekers. People whose work or study permits expired, but they're waiting for renewals. They're here using housing, healthcare, schools.
But not accurately counted in the real-time data used for planning.
That's the concern. Their true numbers might not be reflected in those active demographic tallies.
And that gap, as Tony Keller points out in one source, isn't just an accounting issue. It has serious real-world impacts, right?
Huge impacts. If you don't have an accurate baseline of who's actually here, how can you possibly plan effectively for essential services?
You can't. Housing targets, school openings, hospital staff.
It becomes guesswork. And critically, it makes it really hard to judge if that 5% target by 2027 is even achievable. If the real baseline population is already higher because of this limbo group, the target might be kind of meaningless.
So we've got the policy break, the
Yeah.
slowdown, and now this uncertainty about the actual numbers. What does this deceleration mean for the economy, especially housing? Is this the quick fix people were demanding?
Well, connecting the dots, the economic reality check from experts is pretty blunt. Don't expect miracles overnight.
Okay.
An RBC forecast mentioned in the sources suggests that even with these cuts, housing affordability will improve only gradually.
Gradually. That's not what people wanted to hear, politically speaking.
No. Population cuts act as a headwind to demand, is the phrase they used. It slows the growth in demand for homes. But it's definitely not a silver bullet for soaring rents and prices.
Hang on. Politically, people weren't asking for gradual improvement. They felt there was a crisis, driven by policy, and they wanted immediate relief. How long can that gap persist between the slow economic fix and the public demand?
That's the rub, isn't it? That's the political friction. The reality is the underlying structural problems, decades of slow housing supply growth, zoning issues, infrastructure underinvestment, those take years, decades maybe, to fix. Immigration cuts mostly hit the demand side. They ease some pressure, sure, but they don't magically build the hundreds of thousands of homes needed. So yeah, it's a slow, technical fix for a very immediate, visceral crisis.
And that mismatch, that lack of quick relief, sounds like a recipe for frustration. And when the economic fix is slow, the political pressure to find a scapegoat, it must intensify.
It absolutely does. And in this current moment, a lot of that blame seems to have landed squarely on the Temporary Foreign Worker Program, the TFW program.
Ah, yes, the TFW program.
One source calls it the perfect target. Tangible, easy to pummel, perfectly imperfect.
It's the narrative.
It fits neatly into headlines about displacing Canadian workers or exploitation. Easy to understand, easy to get angry about.
We hear so much about the TFW program now, but what's the history here? It wasn't always meant to be this big recruitment channel, was it?
Not at all. It started back in the 70s. The idea was it would be a true stopgap for rare cases, highly specialized skills, where you could prove no Canadian was available.
Okay, a last resort.
Supposedly. But Campbell Clark, in one piece, notes how it morphed over time. From that stopgap to, well, a much easier way for some businesses to recruit, often with less scrutiny. And eventually, sadly, it did become linked to documented cases of fraud, underpayment, exploitation.
So there are definitely real problems with it that need fixing. That seems clear.
Undeniably.
But here's the critical point, right? The thing for you, the listener, to grasp. The TFW program is actually just a sliver of total temporary migration in Canada, numerically.
That's crucial context. You're right to flag the scale. When the political debate focuses so intensely with what Andrew Coyne calls peculiar vehemence on the TFW program, it risks making that one part seem like the whole problem. Coyne suggests the rhetoric sometimes makes it sound like an existential threat, not just, a mismanaged program needing reform.
So let's say, hypothetically, the government fixed every single issue with the TFW program tomorrow, cleaned it all up. That wouldn't actually solve the bigger national problems. The housing crisis, the healthcare strain that really drove this big break.
Exactly. Fixing the TFW program is important, especially for worker protection. But blaming it for everything else, it's a powerful distraction.
The convenient villain?
Perhaps. The massive underlying issues, housing supply, healthcare capacity, schools, Those are decades in the making. They stem from chronic underinvestment, not just the mechanics of one relatively small visa program. All the political energy focused there won't build houses or hire nurses.
So wrapping this up, what's the big takeaway? The sources we looked at really show this tight link, don't they, between housing affordability and Canadian sense of being this open, welcoming country.
Yeah, when affordability tanked, that long-standing consensus about welcoming newcomers seemed to just fracture really quickly.
And where does that leave Canada now?
Well, the current national mood, or maybe the policy direction reflected in these reports, seems to be about reconciling that history with the new economic reality.
Moving away from unqualified welcome.
Perhaps projecting something more honest, as one source put it. An acknowledgement, maybe, that welcoming millions has to be linked to the actual capacity to house and support them.
Which brings us back one last time to those murky numbers. Given the data gaps we talked about, the paperwork limbo population, and this political tendency to focus on easy targets like the TFW stream, here's a final thought for you to chew on.
Okay.
How long will it take for policy to actually catch up with the messy reality of who is really here? And what does that gap, that disconnect between data, politics, and reality mean for Canada's identity as that welcoming nation going forward?